So I'm glad to be back. I did tune in to, well, half of the class I could hear once the sound was turned on Sunday. But we're going to be in Exodus 19 in just a moment. And yes, I do have a stuffy nose still, but I've been on antibiotics since Saturday. The only problem is I can't smell anything, but you don't need to smell to teach class. So I'm okay. Well, I did shower before class, so if there's a problem, though, you can tell me and I won't be offended. So, but I'm looking forward to studying Exodus with you guys, and let's go ahead and go to God in prayer. Father in heaven, thank you for today. We are amazed to see your power in things like the thunderstorms we had just a few hours ago. You are a God who quaked the mountain at Sinai and had lightning and thunder and fire and smoke. But we know that you are a God that is also a God of words and of actions, and a God who's the quiet, still voice. We're thankful for what you say, and we're thankful for what you do and what you continue to say and do. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right. So this section kind of marks a new section in the story. Of course, the first 15, it has to do with them in Egypt and all that stuff. After that, it's a little bit of wilderness wandering. By the way, this is question 1, but how long does it take for them to make it to Sinai? And you can just look at verse chapter. Yeah, 3 months, right? The way that they counted time was by the full moon. It's the third full moon after they left. Or new moon, sorry, third new moon. So anyways, it's been 3 months that they've been in the wilderness, but from 19 to 24 is a unique section because this is God making a deal with the people. Now, I'm not going to get super technical. We're not here to study the ancient Near East, but this is apparently a type of covenant that they would have been really familiar with, and it was not a covenant of equal partners, because sometimes you have that, right? And currently our government's trying to negotiate deals and trade deals and all that. This is not equal partners. This is the kind of deal you'd make with someone who's stronger than you. So maybe you are a weak nation, but you go to someone and you say, protect me. You're way stronger than me. I'll pay you tribute if you'll keep me safe. Maybe they beat you in battle, and you say, please, don't kill me. We'll be your partners. The fancy name is suzerain, vassal. It just means master-servant, basically. But it's basically when you have a strong person and a weak person make a deal together. So the cool thing about this, though, God is not conquering the people to make a deal with them and make them his people, right? God asks, do you want to follow me? Do you want to make a covenant? Like, let's make this deal. That's sort of a thing. He gives them, hey, are you willing to submit? So look in verse 8, this voluntary thing that they say, all the people answered together and said, all the Lord spoken, we will do. And the Lord brought back the words of the people to Moses. So God says, I've done all this stuff. You know who I am. I'm really powerful. Are you going to follow me? And they say, Moses, yep, we will. Now, famous last words. Are they going to keep to that? It's not going to take long. But still, the idea that God would offer us a choice, he would offer us a deal, that's a really, really cool thing to me. But what does God want in covenant Israel? What does he want? Just really, this is from the verse 8 verses. What is he looking for in the deal? Jerry?
He wants them to love him and obey him.
Good. So, love me, obey my commandments. Good. But what else does he want? Go ahead, Robin.
He wants a people for his own possession. So, and that's what God wants, is he wants people.
And I would argue God has never wanted anything different. And I know that the terms of the covenant change. There's covenants with Adam and Eve. There's covenants with Noah, covenants with Abraham. There's covenants with Israel. And there's a new covenant with us. Right? There's lots of different deals that God makes. But the root of it's always been, I will be your God, you will be my people, right? And while, like I said, the terms and conditions may look a little different depending on when you lived, that's the deal. I'll be yours, you be mine. Now, by the way, God is completely faithful. He never, ever has broken his end of the deal. Humanity will be treacherous at various times, and individually, when we sin, we are being treacherous with God, but he wants us for his own. And, it's powerful, right? He says, out of all the nations on earth, I chose you. And it's not necessarily because they're so great and powerful, because he's the one that's got all the power in the situation. But that's what makes it even more special. He chose them. Any other thoughts on that, Rick?
I was thinking about how he mentioned that you'll be a kingdom of priests to me. And one of the things that I am more familiar with this as a Christian, but I think we forget that physical Israel was a kind of a foreshadowing of what the church would be. And when God made the promise to Abraham about, through you all the families of the earth will be blessed, we always think just in terms of Jesus, but really that's not all that entailed. Israel was meant to be a people for God. And when you talk about priests, well, who are they priests for? If they're a nation of priests, and we always think, well, the rest of the nation, well, yes, but no. That priesthood was supposed to be something that was emblematic of the nations, or emblematic of Yahweh to the nations around them as well. They were supposed to show a goodness, show a kindness when they were faithful to him and how he blesses them. Again, you look at guys like David and Solomon, their fame went out and it drew attention, and God found glory in a lot of that. And so Israel was meant to be a nation that was supposed to teach the other nations around them something about the sovereign king of the universe, and they didn't do a real good job with that, but that was their purpose, and that was an honor for them and a privilege as a nation.
Very good. Good. And I'm glad you brought that up, because there's an element of this. I know both you and Maverick have made comments throughout the class tying this back to Genesis. And I think calling them a royal priesthood is also another thing to do that. Do you remember in Genesis 1, what did God command for people to do? Besides be fruitful and multiply, there's something else. What does God want humankind to do over all creation? Have dominion, right? We were created to rule. Now, that doesn't mean dominate creation and burn it down and just, chop things down and conquer all the animals. That's not what it meant. It was care for, but we were to rule creation. There's a ruling, and that's going to go with the New Testament as well. We're going to be ruling in that sort of a capacity. But also, think about a priest, and I will get to you, Eric, in a second. Think about a priest. What is something a priest gets to do that nobody else gets to do? At least their priests.
They got to go before God.
Good. And think about the garden. Adam and Eve were in God's presence, right? They were holy and clean and pure and innocent. So this holy nation, royal priesthood idea, where they're in fellowship working with God, gets them back to their original purpose. Now, if only they would have lived up to it, but this is God trying to get us back to our purpose for being made. And the Old Covenant was supposed to teach them about that, and to point out they still had some work to do, and God's got some working on them to do. Okay, Eric, do you have a comment first?
I was just saying, like, the rule, I'd read where it's more like we were to tend the world, take care of it.
Yes. Good, yeah.
Just to continue with the idea I kind of mentioned last time, right at the end of class, about how significant the end of chapter 18 is for our judiciary system and how we rule and how the Western worlds work, where decisions are made at the lowest level. That just the idea that's a revolutionary idea. Here we once again have, and there's a ton of that obviously, but especially here in the book of Exodus, there are so many revolutionary ideas, and obviously we'll get to that in chapter 20 here shortly. But this is another one, the fact that you can be called to be holy, and on your own accord, you can improve yourself. You can, again, we got to think, I know we're not looking through trying to study Near East society, but outside of, and talk about being a blessing to the world, outside of Western societies that are founded on really Exodus, but of course the Bible as a whole, the idea of being able to move up social ranks and to improve yourself and be able to change and improve, that is not common. If you look at most other societies, most other cultures that are not founded on the Bible, you are fixed. You are in a class, and that's the class you're in. There's no movement. So this is a very revolutionary idea that is brought forth by this idea of calling people out to be holy, to be different. And it is what allows social mobility. It's what allows people to improve themselves and the stock of their families. You're not stuck where you are. You can get better. You can improve yourself. And that is just one of the many revolutionary ideas that comes from this book.
Okay. Yeah, and when I said that, we're not here to study ancient history necessarily. I just meant I'm not trying to get you bogged down. But I think that it's a very good point you made. There are a lot of timeless things here, a lot of wise things, even that have application far beyond even spiritual things, but ultimately find their fulfillment in being part of God's people, right? And this is just a cool thing. He invites these people. He says, I chose you. Will you submit? And gave them a choice. Go ahead, Nicole.
I had a question. So in verse 3, he calls them the house of Jacob.
Good.
And then again, he calls them sons of Israel. So is there a significance there to why he's calling them Jacob?
I don't know in this text if there is. They are pretty interchangeable. But sometimes by calling him Jacob, I think he's calling back to some of the actual person of Jacob more, the genetic side of it. This is the one I made the promise to. And sometimes when he's talking to them as Israel, it's more like this is the big nation of Israel, that entity that it is. I don't know if it's always that way. In fact, I'm sure there's probably exceptions. But I think that's probably, you are chosen by being Jacob's kids, but now you are the house of Israel, sort of an idea. Did you have something?
Yeah, I was just going to follow up what you said, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's the formulaic expression that Yahweh gives typically. And so I think that you're exactly right. The Jacob emphasis is kind of the lineage, the promise through Abraham. The Israelite is the goal of being those who reign and are princes with God, that sort of thing.
It's a good thing to notice. I'm glad you noticed that. Jesus even plays on those words in the New Testament when he meets Nathanael. And he says, he's he's a true Israel in which there is no Jacob. He's a true child of God, and there's no deception in him. So Jesus even uses these things. That's the thing about the Bible I love. You could read through it and just read it as a surface, but the more we ask questions, I think there is a lot of insight to it. But maybe as we read through, let's notice when he uses Israel and Jacob and try to see how many times that pattern fits. Other thoughts through the first part. I think we know what God's looking for in his people. And maybe if we're to sum it up in one word, it's kind of our theme for the year, right? Which is kind of why Exodus was on my mind as a choice for this year's topic. But it is be holy. And God has invited them to be holy. By the way, from 19 to 24 is when he's going to set that up. He's going to teach them what it means to be holy, but by the end of that, to enter into that covenant, he's going to have to do something. And I'll just spoil it for you. What is the one element in their day and age that once it was used could cleanse them and make them holy? What did God use in Old Testament law to sanctify somebody, to make them holy? Blood, right? He's going to sprinkle blood all over the people, sprinkle blood on the book of the law, sprinkle blood on all these different elements. There's going to be blood involved in this. But he's telling them, are you ready to be holy? You're holy because I've chosen you and set you apart, but you're also called upon to better behavior. But notice they even have to cleanse themselves. And in the middle of the wilderness, they've struggled to find water some places. I can't imagine, this is not an easy process for the whole country to bathe all at once. And they have to restrict certain behaviors to keep themselves pure and clean. And there's even things about their animals, right? What is something that their animals are not allowed to do? In chapter 19. So, yeah. If you're unholy, Even their animals, just a creature touches the animal, put it to death, because this mountain is holy. God is there. And so don't approach God if you are not prepared, if you are not cleansed, if you are not set apart, sanctified, reserved for a purpose, if all these things have not happened. And so they recognize, on one hand, it's amazing that God descends to Mount Sinai and comes low for the people. But even though he came low for the people, how low could he go? In their day and age, not as close as what they might have liked, right? And actually, it might have been one of the classes that I heard while I was at home. Remember, what was the purpose of an idol? What did they do with their idols? What did they think would happen when they offered to an idol, worshiped an idol, bowed down to it? Nicole?
Was that God supposed to inhabit that idol? Okay.
Yeah.
So the idol wasn't a god in itself, but the god would inhabit that.
Sure.
Yeah, there you go, a vessel.
That's exactly right. So their God would come down into this thing, and they would offer it meals or some kind of flower wreath or an offering or something like that, right? God is going to specify in the Ten Commandments, no way. No graven images, none of that. So God does come down, but God dwells in the midst of his people. But he can only do that if they're holy. That's what I want to kind of get at here. He wants to get close. Now, that's probably why John the Apostle chooses in his gospel to talk about God coming down and tabernacling with his people, living with his people in their presence. But Jesus is going to do it in a closer way where he can actually touch a leper and he can touch a sinner and he can bring children into his arms. But at this point in their history, God wasn't doing that. It was amazing that he came down like he did, but he also was still unapproachable. And so I just want you to see that. And Moses is the only one, and I guess Joshua can go up a certain way too, that nobody else besides Moses and Joshua can really even get close. So it's this interesting thing going on here, but they had to prepare themselves to receive the law. And, holiness was very physical and real for them. Sometimes for us, maybe it's hard to visualize, am I holy or not? Am I living a holy life? There was no mistaking this, right? They knew definite markers. They knew there's a line I cannot cross. Here's a behavior I cannot do. Here's the penalty if I break this rule. They kind of had that going on. But God is trying to say, be ready. Be ready for that. Is there anything else? This is really question 2. Things that God required. I sort of covered some of those. Things maybe that stuck out to you about that. I did talk about how serious the precautions. There's death penalty involved in some of these, right? But anything else you noticed or want to bring out from this chapter? Go ahead, Dave.
Well, God told Moses to let the people on the first and second day to consecrate to what he said. And then he told them to wash their clothes, to be clean.
Yes.
Okay. And the third day, he says, God, he will come upon the people, but they do not come near the mountain, or you will die.
Yes. Yeah. And you can't even go up next to him and kill him. It's just shoot him through or stone him, throw a stone at him, even don't get close to that unholiness if someone violates that boundary, right? Rick?
And I always like to make the point to people that it's like, for instance, he talks about, don't go near your wife, don't have that kind of relationship. We think, well, what's God's problem? I mean, he made these things. Is God afraid of his own creation and cooties? And obviously the message of showing that differentiation between how your normal day-to-day activities are and when you approach this God who is meeting you on the mountain. And of course, this is not strange to Israel. This is the world they lived in. There were a concept of the holiness of God's, and you made the point about how this God is even holier, and yet he's coming further. He's descending and humbling himself even more than the gods of the nations around them. And so there's this even greater dichotomy of an even holier God who is willing to descend even farther, but there's still limitations. And it's not that these things are evil, but it's the message of you need to understand that I am separate, and that you're going to be separate, and living those things out, whether it's the cleanliness laws or dietary laws, whatever those things would be an illustration of something that we know even in the Old Testament later on when God says, rend your heart, not your garments. The point has always been to internalize the message, but we understand that the physical stuff can sometimes only go skin deep, and then you miss the message, altogether. So,
Dave has a comment.
On the third day, when we say do not come to the mountain, I think my thought is that when Moses went up there, he told him to remove his sandals because this is holy ground.
Yeah.
Okay, so he's trying to warn the people. The base of the mountain is holy. You're not allowed to come in here at all. I will come down to you and preach, say what I have to say, but this is holy ground. You're not allowed on this ground.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and this is pre-tabernacle. So later on, the tabernacle is where that little patch of holy ground is going to be located. This whole mountain is holy. This is where God has chosen to make his presence known. And by the way, his presence had been visual for 3 months, right? He had been a cloud in the day and a pillar of fire at night. They had seen God, so to speak, a representation of him. But now when he descends, by the way, this is different. That's the second half of question 2. What kinds of things are described as God's presence manifests itself? What would they see? What would they hear? What would they feel? Good smoke, right? There is the fire aspect of this. Good. What else? Thunder and lightning. He's the God of storms. They'd seen that, by the way, with the hailstones and all of that stuff and during the plagues. But, there were storm gods. There were fire gods. And all these. He's all of these, right? Good. What else? Lori? Yeah. So a lot of times when God appears, there's something described as the loud sound of a trumpet. And so also, like when an archangel comes, it talks about this shout of a trumpet, that kind of a thing. It's like the king is here. It's a herald that the king is present. Respect him, listen to him. If a king would have entered a city, they would have hopefully gathered, bowed down, done whatever they were supposed to do to show honor to that king. The king is here. And he's come down from his lofty place and show him the respect he deserves, right? Maverick?
Nicole mentioned earlier about, when you would pray to one of these, the idea that the God would inherit that vessel, would come into it, and they would be inside of it and all that. This is obviously wholly different from that, right? He is not becoming the mountain and living in the mountain while there. That's not the point. He is above the mountain, and even nature is trembling before his existence. And I think there's major significance in that all the worshiping around them that happened in the nations around them are worshiping nature, and so not once again we just see more of this where even nature, which we think of as inert essentially, is terrified in the presence of the Almighty, of the Creator, and we get that here once again. He's above that.
Good. Dave has a comment.
Oh, I was just going to say is something else. They say something about the mountain. It was going to quake.
Okay.
And, it's going to fire and stuff like that is going to come out because the Lord's descending.
Okay. So I won't put you all on the spot, but I don't know if you read my article. I don't know if it was this week's or last week's, whichever one it was. I think it was 2 weeks ago. I wrote about the New Testament interpretation of what goes on in this event. There's something different about this kingdom of priests, and the next one, right? In Hebrews chapter 12, do you remember what is different about the kingdom of God versus the kingdom that's being set up right here on Mount Sinai? Maybe the ladies in Hebrews class might know it. I don't know if I got to it. Go ahead.
Are you going where there would be a select few priests, where we're all priests?
No, I'm thinking super literally. Robin.
He says you haven't come to a mountain that can't be touched.
Yeah.
And basically we have access where they didn't have access.
Good. Yeah. So there's two aspects of it. The first one being you have come to an approachable kingdom versus an inapproachable one. And then literally, this kingdom is shaking, right? What does that imply about this? Can this stuff handle God's full presence? If God were to truly come down full force in all of his force here on earth, unrestricted in any way, this earth wouldn't hold together, you know. There is no way. And so the Hebrew writer says that's because that kingdom was temporary. And by the way, the kingdoms of men can be shaken, you know. They fall apart. The Roman Empire lasted for, depending on how you count it, 500 to 1,500 years. It's not there anymore. You know, they're still digging it up. But the kingdom of God cannot be shaken. It's not a kingdom that can fall or falter. There's no threat to the kingdom. You realize that, right? You might think the world is dark and scary, and in some ways it is, maybe to you or to a family. But the world isn't dark and scary, God. It cannot shake what he set up. And so that's really the big difference. This is a temporary, temporal, earthly, physical, limited existence for a physical, limited people. And the Hebrew writer draws out the idea that we've come to something even beyond and better. As great as this is, it's a kingdom that can be shaken, you know. And the cool thing is it's the same God, and he's the same faithful God who never broke his promises, but, you know, we actually have a different existence because of Jesus doing something that they probably couldn't imagine. I really don't think Israelites could have imagined it. I think this had to happen. The first kingdom, to help get everybody set up so they could even fathom or understand the existence of Jesus. That's my 2 cents. But any other thoughts on really chapter 19, any of the stuff we've talked about, Rick?
Comparing the kingdom of Exodus to the kingdom of Hebrews, I think about, it's almost like on Mount Sinai that Israel's getting it's like God is walking towards there. He's coming to the mountain, but all they're seeing is the dust he's kicking up, the storm, the smoke, the fire. They're never going to see him, right? We can't. And yet, look at how creation rocked at the potential of God. Maybe we'll call it that. I mean, we believe he's there, but yet compared to what we know, we can't see him. The potential of God is rocking heaven and earth. And as you made the point, that the kingdom of Hebrews is one where this isn't the potential. This is the full reality that is consummated because of Jesus. And it's supposed to, the Hebrew writer expects for people who trembled at the idea of the God of Exodus and how impressive that was, to then be drawn even closer to the God of Hebrews, because that mountain is approachable, and you're not just seeing the dust of his passing, you will be at his throne with him, and that imagery is supposed to be building off of the impressive stuff going on in Exodus, and we can tell the people, they were impressed pretty strongly.
Good. A couple of things just to note. This passage is going to be reflected at other times in other appearances of God. Can you think of other times that God thundered from heaven, first of all? Because when Moses talks, God thunders back way louder than Moses and drowns him out, right? I remember preaching one time, and during the sermon, God had his way with the room, and this loud thunderstorm, I had to stop till the thunder was gone, and then I could start. It was kind of cool to see that, but can you think of other times that God thundered from heaven? Go ahead, Jerry. Yeah, the transfiguration, right? There's that voice from heaven, this is my beloved son, whom will well please hear him. What else?
He's going to thunder at one of the rebellions. I can't remember which, but it's more of his light, his glory cloud or whatever just shows up and terrifies everybody and shuts everybody up as he's about to set everyone straight about Moses.
Good, absolutely. The lesser known time God spoke from heaven, because he did it 3 times during Jesus' time. In John 12, he says, glorify your name. And then when God speaks from heaven, he says, I both glorified it, will glorify it again. It just sounds like thunder to most people. It's just overwhelming. Paul, right, on the road to Damascus, there's thunder. That's all that they hear. They don't actually hear the voice except for Paul himself or Saul of Tarsus at the time. Right, do you have another? Yeah. So God speaks from heaven then. So there are multiple times. And then the cloud. That one is all over the place, right? That represents really God's presence, and it is something that smokes people out of places too, right? Really, the next time we're going to see God's cloud, because it's been leading them, where's really the first place that God's cloud kind of inhabits? Yeah, it's the tabernacle, right? And they're making first-time prep worship in there, and they got to run out of there. They're smoked out. And then later on, when Solomon's temple is there, the glory fills it again. It doesn't fill the third temple, but Jesus himself comes in. But this cloud appears at various times, and it's just a cool picture. By the way, a lot of these ideas are reflected in the imagery of Revelation, because that is the true dwelling of God. All this stuff just represents that. I do have a trivia question for you guys, and I don't know if you even thought about this or noticed this. Who were the priests in verse 22? I'm not sure I have the 100% answer, but I think I do. But here's why it's tricky. God hasn't set up a priesthood yet, has he? There's no Levites that are set aside. So I don't know if you noticed that when it says the priests all came near. Who served as priests prior to Leviticus? Because he's going to set up, the tribe of Levi. Lori? Yeah, so heads of the fathers' households. I think that is probably a very likely, that the heads of all the fathers' households came out. Another possible answer some people have given is it was the 72 or so that were picked from the last chapter. I don't know either one. But they didn't yet have the system of worship yet. It's just interesting. They were, each father's household would be led by the patriarch. So I just don't know if you guys noticed that. I like to point out details like that sometimes. Go ahead, Maverick. Or Robin. Okay, sorry, I looked up at the
Something that I had never thought about before. We were talking with the preacher that Julian's working with, and he's recently studied Exodus very thoroughly and talked about how this going up and coming down the mountain. And I just noticed in here, it happens like 4 times in this chapter. And he says in the whole book of Exodus that Moses does this 7 times. I just think that's interesting that it's this process of Moses going before God, coming back down to the people, up and down, up and down.
Yeah. He's really serving that intercessor role. And yeah, the number 7 is significant with that. Here at the end of the chapter does it too. My thought is always he probably went up to the burning bush, and that's where God appears and comes back down, goes up to the burning bush, meets God, comes back down. But everyone else probably worries a little bit about him when they see him kind of go up in those clouds. No, it's a good observation. Thank you. Notice, I just want to read real quick the end of chapter 19. The Lord spoke to Moses, "Go down, warn the people, so they do not break through to the Lord's gaze, and many of them perish. Also let the priests who come near to the Lord consecrate themselves, or else the Lord will break out against them." Moses said to the Lord, "The people cannot come up to Mount Sinai, for you warned us, saying, 'Set bounds about the mountain and consecrate it.' The Lord said to him, 'Go down and come up again, you and Aaron with you. Do not let the priests or the people break through to come up with the Lord, or he will break forth down upon them.' So Moses went down to the people and told them." So Moses and Aaron had been sanctified previously by God. They are, and then later Joshua is going to be allowed to go up there too. But they serve a special role that nobody else does. Moses as the friend of God and the appointed deliverer, and Aaron really is that high priest figure. But yeah, God's presence is awesome. And I don't just mean like a kid says awesome. Like it is awe-inspiring. It is fantastic in a way that you couldn't fathom. You would see it, and your mind would know you're seeing it, and you would hear it, but you just couldn't register what you're seeing. And I don't know, anytime you've been just impressed. Like, this is beyond probably anything we'll ever see. But just this power, the might, the glory, the fear. Later on, they're going to be scared to death, and we don't even want to come near, you know. You go up there without us. But God does warn them, they aren't ready. They aren't set apart. They aren't sanctified. They cannot enter my presence yet. Now, he's going to allow them to enter his courtyards and offer sacrifices, but it's going to take all the stuff that comes between here and Numbers 10, right? There's a whole lot of rules that are going to come. And then, by the way, what do? They complain. They offer to idols, like all these different times. They still can't quite get it. But God is warning them that you got to be holy to be in my presence. Any other thoughts on chapter 19? Harvey. So I need to look over here. I'm sorry, I did not look over there.
You know, from 19 on up through 25, this is the start of a learning curve for Israel for the laws and everything. And the only one that I'm convinced that got the picture entirely was Moses.
Yeah.
Everybody else said they did. Moses had one weak moment, as far as I can tell. But Moses grasped everything the Lord was telling him. The people, they were just giving him lip service.
Yeah. I'll add Joshua to the list. But yes, pretty much just Moses, right? Even Aaron himself doesn't quite get it. Aaron's going to give up faith after a while, or at least be persuaded by the people to give in to their desires. They want to go back and do things the Egyptian way when it comes to worship. And God certainly is not going to be cool with that. All right, so we're going to start the Ten Commandments here. And the actual word that they would have called it comes from, I believe it's chapter 34, the 10 sayings. The 10 words is what it was, sorry. In Exodus 34, verse 1, now the Lord said to Moses, cut out for yourself 2 stone tablets like the former ones. I will write on the tablets the words which on the former tablets that were there. But they called them the 10 words. It's sort of their expression for them. The Decalogue is the modern word, I guess, used for it. But the way that their laws worked, you had a general set of principles, and then you went back and made it more specific. So these first 10 are going to be interpreted further by what comes later. Okay, it says, do not kill. Well, there are some times when killing might possibly have a reason for it in an execution, but he's not giving the exceptions at first. He's going to say, don't take a life, right? Some of them, there is no exception, but he is going to further describe what does that mean. You know, what do you do if you steal? How do you handle that? What do you do if someone commits adultery? How do you handle that? So these first 10 are really important because they sort of are the broad framework that the rest of their law is based upon. I will say, besides the Sabbath day, every other one is repeated for Christians in the New Testament. These are important principles. And I know why people don't want to display the 10 Commandments, but I do kind of wonder sometimes about which one of them do they really have a problem with. We've codified them pretty much into our laws already, you know. But I guess, you know, I wouldn't necessarily want the government to come crack down on me for coveting in my heart. That's, you know, God does that. But, you know, by and large, these are good things, and people are going to be better off if they follow these rules. So, but God is laying them down, making it clear what they're going to agree to, right? How many of us read the terms and conditions really closely, you know? Sometimes we don't, right? God is going to make sure this is repeated. Every 7 years, they're going to read this. The king is supposed to write his own personal copy and study it. The priests and scribes are to constantly write this thing and teach the people and interpret the law. There's supposed to be teachers in 48 cities that are, is it 48 cities of refuge? I think I've got that doubled. However many cities of refuge there are, there's 48 Levite cities. But anyways, there's Levites in 48 cities who teach the law. There's supposed to be enough experts that you can figure it out if you want. The problem is, people don't always want to know the terms and conditions. They want to do what they want to do, but they can never say that God didn't tell them. And everything they get in trouble with in the history, in the kings, in the judges, everything, the prophets, they basically go back and say, hey, it's like this. There's a time in Hosea, he says, you're sinning like somebody who contends with the priest. There's a rule about don't be contentious with the priest, and here's what happens if you are. So God doesn't just arbitrarily throw laws out there. But some people talk about the Old Testament God as if he's this God that's just waiting to nuke people and can't wait to strike them down. But one thing I want you to realize is how many safeguards God says, I don't want you to be unaware. I don't want you to be lost. I don't want to hurt you. You need to follow my law, but here's all of these safeguards along the way. I do it with my kids too. And sometimes I'll count down, and I know that's maybe bad parenting or whatever. It's like, come here, you have 5 seconds. I'm not going to snap my finger, you're here right now. That's not realistic. And sometimes I'll slow down on my last number. I'm like, get over here. I know you're really trying. I really don't want to get my kids in trouble. But there is a time, and my patience has to run out. Okay, you threw a shoe at your brother's head. I'm sorry, we're going to have a consequence here. You broke something. You threw your food across the room. I'm going to have to, something's going to happen right here. But I've warned them along the way, and I can see the look in their eye. I know they're thinking about it. I know what they're going to do, and they know the rules. I'm not making up random rules. God is a parent on the best level, and he's not going to just arbitrarily hurt people or punish them or anything like that. So I want you to learn about God from this. Don't just learn about all these specific rules. What do these rules teach us about God? And that's, I know we don't have much time left. That's why I want to give our interpreting principle, to get it out there, to think about it this week as you're looking through chapter 20 and 21. What do these rules teach us about God and the kind of people he wants his people to be? Because that's what we're supposed to get from the law. And people, they will mock God's law. They're like, well, hey, you're not supposed to have meats and cheeses. You're not supposed to have mixed fabrics. Why don't you apply that law? But they're missing the whole point. The overarching point is God's teaching about holiness. He's teaching about being a special people who listens, who obeys, who loves other people, who's kind to the orphan and the stranger, who trusts him in battle and is brave. You got to step past the details sometimes to see the big picture, and then you go back to the details, right? Eric?
There's something going along. I've been studying about they mock. There's definitely something different between being unclean and being sin and abomination that they tend to forget. I think God's teaching that too. There are things that have to be done, and there's things that you do not do. That's a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the difference between ritually unclean versus you just sinned. You better go offer an animal because God has every right to kill you right now. There's a difference. But in reality, who can stand before God? The fact that he doesn't strike us all down with lightning right away actually says more about him and his patience, which is the thing people, they miss. They get the whole opposite point from the Old Testament. But we'll talk about especially the Ten Commandments and then a little bit of chapter 21 on Sunday's class. Thanks, everybody.
Our first song this evening's He Keeps Me Singing, 391. There's within my heart a melody, Jesus whispers sweet and low. Fear not, I am with thee, peace be still, in all of life's ebb and flow. Jesus, 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 sweetest name I know, fills my every longing, keeps me singing as I go, feasting on the riches of his grace, resting 'neath his sheltering wing, always looking on his smiling face. That is why I shout and sing. Jesus, 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 sweetest name I know, fills my every longing, keeps me singing as I go. Soon he's coming back to welcome me, far beyond the starry sky. I shall wing my flight to worlds unknown. I shall reign with him on high. Jesus, 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 sweetest name I know, fills my every longing, keeps me singing as I go.
Turn over to Acts chapter 17. Acts chapter 17. I think about 10 seconds to think about what I want to say. You have to bear with me for a second. But this is a passage in Acts 17 that I think a lot of us are familiar with because it's the unknown God passage where Paul comes and talks to these people that he really wasn't even planning to talk to at all. He was just kind of passing by, but he noticed what we would call their religious devotion. They had lots and lots of idols everywhere, and lots of different things that were that spoke of their commitment to religious activities. And I used to think that Paul was kind of poking at them when he talks about their being, see how very religious you are. But I don't think he's doing that at all. I think Paul recognized that when he looks and he says, the Bible tells us his spirit was stirred within him. When he sees all this idolatry, I think Paul recognized people that were trying. But they were trying in a way that was, of course, emblematic of the world that they grew up in, a world of religious idolatry and a concept, as we talked about a little bit in our adult class tonight, of how gods worked, where gods would come down and inhabit this idol. You would feed them, you would provide certain offerings, and by feeding these idols, you allowed them to do their job. But these gods that would come and inhabit this idol, they needed your help. They needed your sustenance. We don't typically think of it that way, but that was very much the mindset of the people of this world, that these gods, you served them. That was your role, so that they could then, in turn, do their part for the cosmos, keep the stars in the sky and the sun and the moon, and they had a role to play, that everything was created for the process of keeping creation going. But Paul had a message to bring to them of a God who was very different, a God who would challenge the idea and the notion that they had since the Tower of Babel, when Yahweh dissociated himself from the rest of the nations and went and he chose Abram to make this great nation from. And some of you, I've talked to this already, so some of you will know where I'm going with this. But over in, we'll pick up with about verse 23. Paul talks about, I was passing through and considering the objects of your worship. I even found an altar with this inscription, to the unknown God. Therefore the one whom you worship without knowing him, I proclaim to you. God who made the world and everything in it, since he is Lord of heaven and earth, does not dwell in temples made with hands, nor is he worshipped with men's hands as though he needed anything, since he gives to all life and breath and all things, and has made from one blood every nation of men to dwell on all the face of the earth, and has determined their pre-appointed times and the boundaries of their dwellings, so that they should seek the Lord in the hope that they might grope for him and find him, though he is not far from each one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being, as also some of your own poets have said, for we are also his offspring. When I was doing my meeting down in North Carolina a couple of weeks ago, I was preaching a text from this text for a sermon, and something kind of came to me as I was reading it that I hadn't noticed before, and that was the difference that Paul is making between the vision that these folks have had that was classic of the Greco-Roman world, of how gods operated versus how the God that he was bringing to them operated. And it's summed up particularly in verse 24 when he says, God who made the world and everything in it, since he is Lord of heaven and earth, does not dwell in temples made with hands, nor is worship with men's hands, as though he needed anything, since he gives to all life and breath and all things. Their vision of God or gods was of, they just had a role to play. They were a cog in the system like everything else. And as that system rolled along, they had parts to play, but if they didn't play their parts, then the gods couldn't play their parts. The gods needed stuff from the human beings. And so there was kind of this, they were just kind of like superior citizens in this creation. Where they came from, that's always a good question. Who created the gods? Well, they don't really have much of an answer for that. They basically are self-created. But Paul says, I'm going to tell you about a God who is completely unlike what you have been used to. A God who you do not invoke him into some golden or silver or wooden idol, call upon him to come down, and then you bring the food, and like Jeremy said, you bring the wreath or the flour or the water or the wine so that they are sustained, so that they can do their job because they need you. This is not the God that Paul is talking about. He says, I am going to tell you about the God who made everything, the God who doesn't need anything from you. Doesn't need anything. But instead, he wants a relationship with you. And that picture of I think about when I think about somebody groping after something, I think about being in the dark, trying to find your way to the light switch when you wake up in the middle of the night and you need to go to the bathroom and you're groping for things to make sure that you don't trip and fall over something. But the picture is, he says, we're groping after him, but he's not far from every one of us. We can find him. And what an incredible picture. As we were talking in Bible class tonight about the God who is so holy that he cannot abide the sinfulness of man, and yet he wants a relationship with man, and that he went through the process of giving us Jesus so that we could be reconciled, so that our sins could be purged, our sins could be washed away, so that he could have a relationship with creatures that have no business having a relationship with him because of sin. And I just wonder, for all of the mocking that will come later in this sermon as Paul talks about the resurrection, I wonder the people that are listening to this for the first time, what that would have meant, because Paul is attacking the very idea that God needs stuff from people. No, that's not why God is here. That's not why God is acting. God is not acting because he needs us. God is acting because he wants us. And that is an incredible thing. Someone who is so powerful and sovereign that he is uncreated. His very name means the self-existent one. I am. Says, Rick, I don't need anything from you. You need everything from me, and I want you in my life. And Paul is opening that door up to people who that's a new concept for them. Well, we fast forward a couple thousand years, and now the concept people have more than anything is kind of has gone back to God needs you. The idea that people can come to God and tell him, I'm going to worship how I want. I'm going to make my own plan of salvation. I'm going to operate the way I want. I'm going to talk the way I want. And God, because he's so loving, because he needs me, is kind of the attitude, that I can just do what I want and he'll deal with it. You see how people have fallen back? Idolatry has kind of come completely full circle. We've gone from the God who needs nothing, or where people said, oh, well, God needs our help, to a God who needs nothing, back to, well, God needs me again. No, God doesn't need us. He wants us. And there is a titanic difference. And that should have an impact on how we approach him. That we appreciate the fact that though unworthy as we are allowed to come to him because of Jesus. And we can have a fellowship and a relationship with him because of Jesus that we have no business having. We worship and serve and pursue a holy God who has descended so far down that the only thing he hasn't done is take away our free will. But in the exercising of that free will, he demands to be revered. And just like he told Aaron after he killed Nadab and Abihu, he said, those who come near to me must revere me as holy. And that's what we're trying to do. We don't want to forget that we're the ones who need him, but that he who needs nothing wants us. Hopefully that will help to keep me humble and you humble in our pursuit of him. What does your relationship with God look like tonight? If you have not yet become a Christian, then as good a person as you may be and as good a person as you think you are not sinless, and sin must be dealt with. You can deal with that through the blood of Christ tonight. He said, he that believes and is baptized shall be saved. If you believe he's the Son of God, are you ready to confess that before men, to repent of the sins you've lived and be buried in baptism, to die with him on that cross in a simple act of submission? For those of us here who have already done that, are we acting and living our life like it's a privilege for God to have us versus that it's a privilege for us to have him? I want to temper our attitude. We want to be humble before the sovereign Lord, because as humble and as beautiful and as gentle as he is the Almighty, and we never ever want to forget that. Can we help you tonight in some way to better and further your relationship with God? If so, come forward as we stand and sing.
In the valley where countless dangers hide, it may be in the sunshine that I in peace abide. But this one thing I know, if it be dark or fair, if Jesus is with me, I'll go anywhere. If Jesus goes with me, I'll go anywhere. 'Tis heaven to me where'er I may be, if he is there. I count it a privilege here, his cross to bear. If Jesus goes with me, I'll go anywhere. It is not mine to question the judgment of my Lord. It is but mine to follow the leadings of his word. But if to go or stay, or whether here or there, I'll be with my Savior, content anywhere. If Jesus goes with me, I'll go anywhere. 'Tis heaven to me where'er I may be, if he is there. I count it a privilege here, his cross to bear. If Jesus goes with me, I'll go